Blog Talk Radio, the world's largest online radio network.
I'm Deepak Chopra, and this is the Deepak Chopra radio show on Blog Talk Radio. In this program, we have been talking about so many things: spirituality, relationships, love, success, health and well-being, consciousness, astrophysics, quantum physics, evolution. And today our special guest is a senior astronomer with Seti Institute, Dr. SETH Shostak. Says he has developed an interest in extraterrestrial life at the tender age of 10. Since then, he's been interested in when he first picked up a book about the solar system. This innocent beginning eventually led to a degree in radio astronomy, and now he's a senior astronomer, and he's an enthusiastic participant in the Institute's SETI observing programs. He also heads up the International Academy of Astronautics SETI Permanent Study Group. In addition, Seth is has many other interesting outreach activities, interesting the public and especially young people in science in general, and astrobiology in particular. He's co-authored a college textbook on astrobiology, continues to write trade books on SETI. In addition, he's published nearly 300 popular articles on science, giving many dozens of talks annually. He's the host of the Seti Institute's weekly science radio show, Are We Alone? And as might be evident from this bio, he's also the editor of Explorer. So first of all, Dr. Shostak, may I call you Seth?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. What, for those of us who don't know, our listeners, what SETI is? Can you? What does the acronym stand for?
Yes, well, it's SETI, S-E-T-I, which
yes.
is almost my name, actually, but that's coincidence.
Yes.
It stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. So,
okay.
This is looking for life in the cosmos, but not just any kind of life, not microscopic life, but looking for intelligent life that's at least as clever as we are.
I see. And you say that you began to have this interest when you were almost 10 years old, and you picked up a book on the solar system. So let's kind of, for again the lay person, the way astronomers, I believe, do their work, like all other scientists, is they have theories, they design experiments, and then they make observations, and then they see if their theories are right or wrong. And with this, we've picked up, with this kind of scientific enterprise, if I may say so, we know a lot more about the universe today than we did even in Einstein's time. All the things we know about dark matter, dark space, and the fact that most of the universe is actually invisible, and that it seems to be such an interesting fact that with all that we know, as far as we know, we are the only conscious beings or life in the universe. But you seem to think there may be life elsewhere.
Well, I do, Deepak. Part of it is just a numbers game. One thing that we've learned, since the time of Einstein, in fact, only in the last 15 years, is that planets are very, very commonplace. We didn't know that. When I was a kid, I would go to the Hayden Planetarium in New York City, and they would tell you that planets might be very, very rare, that this might be an extraordinarily special place around the sun here with a bunch of planets, including our own. But we now know that probably 90% of all stars have planets. Planets are as common as cheap motels. They're all over the place.
Yes, and there are billions of stars, so that makes for billions and billions of planets, right?
Well, indeed, that sounds like Carl Sagan. But indeed, it's even more than that. That's an underestimate, and that's an underestimate even for our own galaxy. Our own galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, probably has about 1 trillion, that's with a T, about 1 trillion planets. Now, that's a big number. But if you don't like our own galaxy, if our own galaxy is not good enough for your gusto-grabbing lifestyle, we can see 100 billion other galaxies, and each of them probably have 1 trillion planets. So, the number of planets in the universe is like the number of grains of sand on all the beaches of America. That's a big number.
So you said there are 100 billion galaxies, or that's the number that we know?
That's the number we know. There are undoubtedly more, and indeed there could even be infinitely more. That's a possibility. It's not ruled out by what we know, but there certainly are more. So that's a lower limit, yes.
Mm-hmm. So there are trillions and trillions of planets, and therefore statistically it's possible, or maybe even likely, that there may be a planet with the kind of biosphere that we have, which would be hospitable to the kind of life that we are used to, or that we know.
Yes, indeed. And in fact, there's an experiment going on right now, and I think this is one of the most interesting science experiments going right now. I think this is actually just as interesting as what's being done in Europe at the Large Hadron Collider. This experiment is called Kepler. And the Kepler is the name of a telescope that NASA has put into space. And what it's trying to do is answer this very simple question, and that is, what fraction of all the stars in the cosmos have planets that might have liquid oceans and thick atmospheres and nice temperatures like you might have in, downtown Baltimore on a good day? I mean, what fraction of stars have planets that could be inhabited? And we don't know the answer to that. We will know the answer to that by this time next year, but we don't know now. But it's looking like sort of early returns are suggesting that number might be 1% or something like that. And if it is, that means there are literally billions of planets, again, just in our galaxy, that could host life. And, maybe they're all as sterile as a mule, but that would be very exceptional.
Well, this is very exciting, because you said that we would have this kind of information in about a year.
Yes, and that's because of this telescope, the Kepler telescope, that anybody can read about it on the web. It's a very interesting project. It's been running for a couple of years now, but the answer to this particular aspect of what it's trying to find out, what fraction of stars have Earth, how many cousins of Earth are out there, that number should be in this year.
And you said it could be in the billions.
In our galaxy, that number I expect will be on the order of, yes, billions. And, that billion is a big number, and most planets, even if they do have watery oceans and, landscapes of rock and whatever and some atmosphere, maybe many of them don't ever produce life. But when you say that, what you're saying is that Earth is some sort of miracle when it comes to spawning life. And that could be, until you find another example, you don't really know. But on the other hand, there is historical precedent here. And the historical precedent is that every time we thought we were special, at least astronomically, we were wrong. So on that basis, I would say there's good reason to think that we have plenty of cosmic company. Give me an example
where we thought we were special, we were wrong. What do you mean by that, Seth?
Well, think of the situation, 500 years ago. Before Copernicus, we still thought that Aristotle was right, that the entire cosmos pivoted about the Earth. We were the nexus of all that there was. Well, Copernicus said, well, that's not really right. It's the sun that's the center of everything. It turns out he wasn't right, but just moving the center from the Earth to the sun caused a great deal of consternation and objections by the church and so forth. But, within a couple hundred years, we knew the sun wasn't the center either. In the beginning of the 20th century, we thought there was only one galaxy, and we were near the middle of it. Well, that isn't true either. Every time we thought there was something special about our situation in all of creation, we were wrong. So that's the historic precedent.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but people have mentioned that even Einstein did not know that there were more than, say, one or two galaxies. Is that true, that he did not know there was anything beyond, say, Andromeda or the Milky Way? Or, maybe I'm just misquoting something I heard.
Well, he did know about other galaxies because the fact that these little fuzzy patches on the sky, which we now call galaxies, in the old days they just called them nebulae, which just means, cloudy thing. Right. We knew about those, and by the 1920s, people like Edwin Hubble and some other astronomers had shown that they're very far away, so that they really were galaxies. But what Einstein did not know, because he'd been told by the astronomers, was that this whole assembly of galaxies that stretched off as far as we could see, he thought that was all a static arrangement, that it had been here forever and likely would stay here forever. And it was only when Hubble did some other work and showed that, well, things are moving away from us, the universe is expanding, that was something that Einstein hadn't foreseen, even though his equations of relativity predicted that the universe must be either expanding or contracting. He didn't really believe that result because the astronomers were telling him, don't worry, Edwin, that can't be true. The universe is not expanding or contracting. It's pretty much the same from day to day. That's the thing that he messed up on, called his greatest blunder.
Right. And so now we know that the universe is expanding, but galaxies kind of remain as a unit, right? They separate from each other, but a single galaxy, like say the Milky Way, it functions as a unit. Is that true because of dark matter?
Well, it's true because even without the dark matter, that would probably be true. The dark matter does help. That's correct. You don't have to worry about the galaxy expanding. I think Woody Allen once wrote that he was worried that Brooklyn was expanding, and he doesn't actually have to worry about that because the local gravity keeps local things together. I mean, the whole universe is expanding, but, your next door neighbor is probably not expanding. Although in the case of my neighbor, he probably is. But you know what I mean. Yes, locally things do not necessarily expand. But the universe as a whole, the space between the galaxies, is getting larger all the time.
And what is that force, this we call dark energy, where space repels space, and apparently this repulsion increases the further, things get apart. What is this force? Do we know what it is?
Yeah, Deepak, if I knew what dark energy was, I would be on a plane to Stockholm to collect a Nobel Prize.
Okay. So we don't know what it is. Okay.
We don't know. And in fact, the very term dark energy is just a stand-in for our ignorance. It's something that does exactly what you said. It pushes space apart, but, there are ideas about what it might be, but nobody knows.
So now you're known as an and before I continue, I just want to remind my audience that they're listening to Deepak Chopra Radio on the Blog Talk Radio, and I'm speaking with senior astronomer with SETI Institute, and I'm speaking to Dr. SETH SHOSTAK, and we are talking about the possibility of life in elsewhere in the universe. And so far what I've learned is that there are trillions of planets, and statistically it's likely that there may be many that harbor life as we recognize life. So that's where we are. We were talking about the expanding universe, and my next question was going to be about astrobiology. So, he is known as an astrobiologist. Define that term, sir, for our audience.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me to call myself an astrobiologist, I think my fellow astrobiologists would ask to see some sort of ID on that. But part of astrobiology, which is, astrobiology is the study of not only life beyond Earth, but, how that might work, what sort of conditions do you need to have life, how did life get started on Earth? One of the great questions of science today is, how did life get started on this planet? The Earth has been carpeted with biology for 3.5–4 billion years at least. So, as soon as the Earth sort of cooled down after its birth and was able to support life, life appeared, happened very quickly. And so people want to know, well, how did that happen? What was the mechanism there? We don't know. That's part of astrobiology. Obviously, is there life on Mars? And, we have plenty of probes that we send to Mars looking for life there. There are at least 6 other places in the solar system that might have liquid water. The moons of Jupiter, the moons of Saturn, there are habitats all over. All of that is part of astrobiology, but also the subject of, well, what about intelligent life? What about the kind of aliens, if you will, that, could hold up their side of the conversation? Are there any of those? And so SETI is, by really definition more than anything else, is a part of astrobiology.
Hmm. Now, of course, it's true that our biological organism, which is mostly carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and of course some of the other elements in the periodic table, that all these elements that make up our biological organism, which includes our nervous system, of course, which is making it possible for us to have this conversation, these elements are fashioned, manufactured in stars. Literally, we are luminous, stardust conscious beings. And so since the raw material of our biological organism is manufactured, the manufacturing plant is the crucible of stars, and since there are so many of them, this raw material exists everywhere, and given the right conditions, there's no reason why it should not spawn life the way life is spawned on planet Earth.
Yes, that's actually an excellent summary of the situation. We actually know this. This isn't just a hypothesis, but we know that the composition of stars and planets, as far off as we can see them, is the same as here. I mean, you can find planets, and we found thousands of planets now, actually, thanks to Kepler. And we know it's, without doubt the case that if you went there and you analyzed the junk, whatever it is, that these things are made of, it would be the same stuff that you find right here at home. I mean, it's the same 92 elements, and to the extent that we can measure the, relative abundance of these elements, it's not so different either. So, it's the entire universe is, as far as we can tell, is made of the same stuff, the same physics, the same chemistry. Maybe that makes you feel better if you were suddenly transported to the Andromeda Galaxy and had to live there. At least you wouldn't have to take physics and chemistry again.
Same physics, same chemistry, the same constants of nature, the same mathematical principles that govern the laws of nature uniformly spread out throughout the universe. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't other universes, if you will, or maybe even distant parts of our universe that we can't actually measure that are built differently. That could be, that's a fashionable idea of cosmology these days, the idea of parallel universes. That's not ruled out. But the universe that we see, the universe that we observe every night with our telescopes, is everywhere the same.
Okay, so now, Seth, I'm going to go a little metaphysical on you, and forgive me for that, because that's that's the way I am. I see this all as an activity of the universe. That you said yourself that, in Hubble's time, the universe was felt to be static. Now we know it's not static. It's constantly in motion, but it's also in motion as an activity. And the reason I'm saying this is that if you start to think of the universe more as a verb than as a noun, with these principles that we've been talking about, the laws of physics, the laws of chemistry, mathematics, the constants, then you and I are an activity of the universe. Would you agree or disagree?
No, I would agree. We are an activity of the universe, and indeed, we like to think of ourselves as an important activity of the universe, and the jury's still out on that. We might be. We're special in some sense, and there are no other Homo sapiens around, and we are sentient beings. We're conscious beings, and that might make us special.
So we are a conscious being or a conscious activity of a universe, and you know where I'm going. Therefore, is the universe conscious? If it has a conscious activity, how can a universe have a conscious activity while being unconscious by itself?
Well, I'm not sure I know the answer to that. All I know is that this building I'm sitting in here in the Silicon Valley, it has some conscious parts to it. They're sitting in cubes mostly, in offices. But the building itself is not very conscious, best I can tell.
Well, of course, now we're getting into the problem of consciousness itself, because the building is also an activity in your consciousness. So is it not? I mean, how do you know there's a building? Because you see color and form and texture. These are actually forms of awareness within awareness.
Well, maybe what you're asking, Deepak, is if this building would really have any meaning without the little 3-pound brain critters that are sitting inside doing things. And that may be true. Certainly the building
because
wouldn't exist.
The brain is also an activity of the universe, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It
an
is
ongoing activity which requires the universe to be as it is. Otherwise, this ongoing activity wouldn't be existing, You know what? The reason I'm asking you, I don't know, many years ago I read this book by Alan Watts. I don't know if you're familiar with him or his writings. But he said, imagine a bunch of aliens coming to planet Earth shortly after it cooled down. And they looked around and said, oh, just a bunch of rocks, nothing else. And then they went back in their spaceships, and then they came back a few billion years later and said, oh, no, this was just the wrong season we came in, and this bunch of rocks was actually a peopling bunch of rocks, that was spawning all the time into this activity that we call life. And so when you start to think in terms of an activity, then, you and I it's like if you have an electrical current that has a positive and a negative terminal, you need both the positive and the negative to have the electrical current, and you just happen to right now step into the electrical current or this activity so many billion years later, and you say, oh, this, it's not just a bunch of rocks, it's got people as well. But, the principle remains the same. Maybe you have a Big Bang, and then you have the constant evolution of the universe. We don't know where it's going with this expanding universe, but we happen to be an activity at what your friend Primack would call midpoint or Midgard or whatever term he uses.
Well, I'll say this. Every time I'm confronted with the idea that maybe we are really what the universe is all about. That, the Big Bang happened because eventually that would lead to us, and we're the, interesting part of the universe. Of course, that sounds rather self-centered. And for the kind of reasons we've already discussed, I'm always a little bit leery to think that we're all that special. But there is this, and you've undoubtedly heard it before, but that is the fact that if you were to take some of these constants of the universe and change them slightly, we wouldn't be here. Stars wouldn't work, and planets, and so forth. And life wouldn't work, and we wouldn't be here. Now, that, as Freeman Dyson, a famous physicist, has said, he said, it's as if the universe knew we were coming. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like, indeed, we do have this intimate connection with the universe because we wouldn't exist if it weren't the way it is. Now, how do you beat that rap? If you're a scientist, you could say, all right, that's just the way it is. But that's not very good. That's not very satisfying. Alternatively, you could say, look, if it were any different, we wouldn't be sitting around having this conversation, right? So, of course, it has to be conducive to our existence. Yeah, but that's not very satisfying either because, it makes it somewhat special. The third way of looking at this, and what has, as I say, become very fashionable, is to say, look, there are lots and lots of universes. There's this kind of eternal, if you will, meta space, this meta-universe that's always been here, always will be here. And little big bangs are going off all the time. We're in one of them. And most of these big bangs produce universes that are, they're the wrong, they're 2 dimensions rather than 3, or they're 12 dimensions. They're wrong. The gravitational constant's wrong. Something's wrong with them. They'll never produce stars, planets, or life. And there's zillions of those guys. But, of course, just like with a whole bunch of lottery tickets, most of them are losers, but some will be winners. And we're in a winner because we're having this conversation. That idea has become quite fashionable.
I know it has, but actually it makes it even more interesting because, like Thomas Edison designing, a trillion light bulbs before he gets the right one. I mean, that's how you do experiments. You'd have theories, you do experiments, and some work and some don't, and so you hit the jackpot once in a while. That doesn't totally exclude an intelligent mechanism at the heart if our creativity and our thinking and our science is in some way a minute replica of a bigger creative experiment that's going on there.
Well, it's true. You cannot say that isn't what happened. I mean, that's another approach to the whole thing. Is say that this thing was the deliberate work of a supreme being or something, and who knew exactly what he was doing, and made a universe that was eventually going to spawn us. But that's again, and you've already said it's a metaphysical idea, and it's very hard for science to prove that. So, most scientists will say, okay, well that's fine, but I can't send in a paper to the Astrophysical Journal saying, here's why the Big Bang happened.
With the current way astrophysics works. But now tell me, all these other theories, the M theory, the multiple universe theory, or eternal inflation, these are, in a sense, metaphysical, aren't they? I mean, how would you ever falsify them or prove them?
Well, the way you normally do in science, to begin with, falsifying things is certainly a technique of science. And when you learn about how science works in, junior high school or whatever, very often they will talk about you set up a hypothesis and then you set up an experiment to prove the hypothesis and try and falsify it, try and find a counterindication that your theory is wrong. But a lot of science actually doesn't work that way. It's, discovery science. The Kepler telescope, looking for planets that are somewhat like the Earth.
Right.
In a way, it's not very good at falsification. It would be hard to prove that they don't exist, but there's at least some chance that you'll find that it does exist. So a lot of science is like that. In the case of establishing whether there are, for example, multiple universes or whether there's only one and we're the result of a very clever decision made by some being, there are ways to prove whether there are multiple universes, apparently. There have been some suggestions. There have even been some papers published with evidence saying, look, here's the result of some, string theory membrane crashing into our universe 13 billion years ago. So scientists are not totally, they haven't thrown up their hands here and said, these ideas are so esoteric, there's just no way that they could fall within the bailiwick of science.
Yeah, I did read somewhere a statement by Max Tegmark that's saying if it's mathematically true, then it must have a physical correlate somewhere.
Yes.
And
just when you think that scientists have reached a dead end, the question I used to get many years ago was, well, what was there before the Big Bang? And most scientists would have said, you can't ask the question. And the reason you can't ask the question is because time is part of the universe. And so before the Big Bang doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, there was no time.
But that's not what they say anymore. So, scientists are pretty inventive.
Right. By the way, there's a lot of buzz today on the internet, and I'm looking at some of it this morning. And the headline seems to be that scientists figure out how to cloak time, and that this is some very reliable information that's coming out from Cornell and just published in the journal Nature that scientists at Cornell was on a very small scale able to loop time in such a way that they created a hole in time, which basically means that they erased time, even though it was a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a second. But by erasing time, they erased whatever happened in that time. They erased the history of what happened. Now, of course, if this is true in principle, then it makes it even more mysterious. You kind of create a hole in time where an event took place, and now that event never happened.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen the story. Unfortunately, that story's been cloaked from me today because I've been on the road. But
I would be very curious when you do look at the story, and maybe we can do another program. We just kind of scratched the surface today, but it's been very interesting to me to listen to you, and actually fascinating that it now makes it more likely that there is life elsewhere in the universe.
Well, I think that there is. I'll bet you a cup of coffee we find something within 24 years. It may only be dead microbes on Mars, but it might be more interesting than that. And in any case, if we don't find it, you'll get a cup of coffee from me.
I have been speaking to Dr. Seth Shostak, Senior Astronomer with the Seti Institute. We've been talking about his favorite subject, astrobiology, and about the possibility of life elsewhere in the universe being more likely than we thought in the past. And this has been a fascinating conversation, and you will find it online, and you'll be finding it referenced on Twitter and Facebook, and you can come back to listen to it more than once, because some of the ideas discussed here have been very new, at least to me, and it's been a great pleasure to have Dr. Seth Shostak on the show. For the future, I want you to also know that our Sages and Scientists Conference will be happening in March of this year, March 3 to 5, and we have a very interesting group of scientists, physicists, cosmologists, astronomers, sages, philosophers, poets, and psychotics like me as well. So please check in with choprafoundation.org and register if you want to come. And I am hoping that we'll be able to get Seth interested in joining our conference one of these days as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Seth Shostak.
It's been my pleasure, Joe. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm Deepak Chopra signing off. Till next time, keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars.
Blog Talk Radio, where millions of hosts and listeners gather.